Happy Easter, you all. In times that are so difficult and hard for us to imagine rebirth of any kind other than the spring, which always reminds us because nature never forgets. Roberta Bundy had just started teaching at Chandler Theological School in Atlanta. Her own life up to that point had not been easy. She'd been brought up by a secularly minded father who abused her and her Southern Baptist mother who ignored her, and Roberta had to reconcile a life of abuse and hell and damnation with her longing for love and compassion. She had finally broken through the abuse after many years of therapy, went to graduate school, started a family, and now had this new professorship. She and her husband attended an ecumenical dinner church, sort of a New Age phenomena that people meet over dinner and break the bread and drink the wine. One day, one of her dear friends called her to say that her son Evan had been in a motorcycle accident. It had been on Good Friday. Evan had been estranged from his parents for some years, preferring the company of the hard-drinking and drugging motorcycle crew that he was with. That said, Evan was not drinking and was wearing his helmet when he was hit by a drunk driver head-on. Roberta, who had a daughter about Evan's age, rushed to Grady Hospital in Atlanta. Grady is a large, complex public hospital with Atlanta's only level 1 trauma unit. When Roberta arrived, she found Evan's parents, Nicole and John, in the waiting room right off the ICU. And they were surrounded by other people from their church who were holding them. Evan was alive, but clearly in grave danger. Roberta looked around the drab waiting room with its chipped green paint and the coffee machine in the corner. And then she noticed another group in the room with them, Evan's friends, about 6 of them, all wearing leather and piercings and spiked hair. They were there to keep vigil as well. Roberta didn't want to like these people. In fact, despite priding herself on being a progressive Christian, she didn't want to like the people. They represented all the heartache that Evan's parents had gone through, the emails and the phone calls unanswered, the holidays missed, the worry that their 21-year-old son would end up just like this. And the more Roberta looked at them huddled quietly in the corner, the more she felt her heart seized upon the darkness of the moment. Roberta finally had her chance to go in and see Evan. He was on life support. His body was bruised and broken. She found herself staring at his thick black hair and wishing it could save him now. After several hours late into the night, the doctor finally came. He was young and not very experienced in how to talk with a family in this kind of a crisis. And so he finally just blurted out the truth. Evan is in very serious condition, and even if he survives, he's not likely to regain consciousness. I'm afraid there isn't much to do, the doctor said. And with that, the room exploded into tears. Over the course of the next 12 hours, more and more friends of family and the friends of Evan started to arrive, and they brought food and flowers, and someone brought a guitar, and the staff moved the entire group to a big conference room down the hall. As the two groups became one, they were still separated by age and faith and circumstances, but they were becoming a one. They were becoming a we. Evan's friends would go in and see him, and they too would come out crying and broken. Evan, it turned out, as the friends explained to the others who were there, took care of many of them. He was the one who brought food when it was needed. He was the one who helped them get help with their addictions and get to drug rehab. Evan was clearly the center of that community. And clearly his loving heart had found its way into a home that was also grieving along with his parents. As this new community began to take shape in that large conference room, someone suggested we should have a prayer circle, and so the 40 or so of them, some clad in leather and others in homespun vests, made a circle and suggested that Roberta, since she was the religious professional in the room, should lead the prayer. It did not escape her that this was after midnight on Good Friday at this point, now into the dark day of Saturday. and she did her best to ask for strength and love, and yes, even a miracle to bring Evan back. Through her tears, she could see the new community, those who were so different, holding hands and singing to an out-of-tune guitar, all of them the stuff of stars. Easter is a layered holiday. It is often connected in some way or other with Jewish Passover, but the actual roots of Easter go back to pagan beginnings. This is sometimes a shock for my Christian friends. Easter is actually named for Oistra, the Celtic goddess of spring. It's a fertility holiday. Thus the eggs and the bunnies and the lambs and all that. You know what that all means. Now, not all UUs get Easter right either, I think. I think specifically of a young girl in a class, a preschool class, who was asked, at one point her class was asked, well, what is this holiday coming up? What's Easter about? And one little kid raised his hand and said, is that with the fireworks? And no, that's the 4th of July. And another kid raised his hand and said, well, what about the turkey? Well, sometimes there's turkey, but no, you're thinking of Thanksgiving. And then finally a little UU girl raises her hand. She goes, I know. The teacher says, oh, okay, what is it? She said, well, it's when Jesus died and he was laid in the tomb, and then after 3 days, the stone was rolled away, and he walked out, and if he saw his shadow, there'd be 6 more weeks of winter. So it's a complicated day, but it's a powerful day. It's a powerful day because in the story, in the Christian story, Jesus' death is first seen as a defeat. I mean, after all, it was a crucifixion, one of the most brutal ways that the Roman imperial world had to keep order. Only political prisoners and those who were insurrectionists would be nailed to a cross. And when Jesus was condemned by Pilate to death, it may not have been a trial at all. He was nailed to the cross, and all his male disciples fled for the hills because they thought they would get caught and charged as insurrectionists. Only the women stayed. Of course, the women stayed, right? The women stayed there in sight of the cross, Mary, his mother, and Mary Magdalene, his favorite disciple. At the very end of his life, according to the Gospel of Mark, he says, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's a heartbreak of astonishing depth if you think about it. Here he was supposed to be the Messiah, the anointed one who was going to make the first last and the last first and bring a revolution to this small heartland of Judaism under the yoke of Roman occupation. What happened? What happened, the disciples had asked themselves. Where had our God gone? It was about the 3rd century when the early Christian church took this pagan holiday of Oistra and laid the Easter story on top of it, closely connected but not always overlaying the Passover story, because the Passover story in Judaism is closely connected to Jesus. Jesus was, after all, a Jew. He was a Jew trying to reform Judaism, not start Christianity. That's something that happens later. Christos, the anointed one in the Christian story, is the one who is supposed to come back. And many thought they did see him on the road to Emmaus, on the road. Later, they thought they saw the Jesus who had died come back to life. Now, this is all part of a great Jewish tradition, which is known as Midrash. Midrash is a way of interpreting stories and reinterpreting them in ways that make sense in life. Because Jesus dying on a cross or on a tree is also foretold of the great prophet Isaiah in the Hebrew Bible. The prophet who was said to suffer for his people and died and would return. So a lot of the interpretation, said the early Jewish teachers, could actually be that Jesus was supposed to be the second Isaiah. But we don't know what happened. We may never know what happened. There's enough history to say that Jesus was actually a person who lived and died. But beyond that, it is lost to the mists of time. Crucified criminals were usually not laid in a tomb. They were probably thrown in a common grave. And perhaps that's where Mary Magdalene has that line in Mark where she says, "They have taken my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." The story of the tomb is quite powerful. Far from being a Christian event to glorify the death, it was the Jewish take again on that old story of the tomb being the place from which we rise again in life, not in death, in life. And the cross and his death and the stone and the tomb, these are all metaphors for life, great truths in life. They speak of the unmistakable suffering that we all feel, the hope we have right now for a better tomorrow. The spirit that carries us onward despite all the odds. We die, or some part of our life dies, and we are placed in a tomb of sorts, a time from which we must reemerge in life. Perhaps that's happening to you now. Perhaps you feel as if you are in the tomb. But friends, that life exists on this small blue planet, which the astronauts just saw a couple of days ago, in this rather ordinary solar system, at the edge of a rather ordinary galaxy, one of billions of galaxies. This, for me, is a constant reminder that life may be resurrection itself. The possibility of it may actually exist beyond this planet. Because life can, if it needs to, always find a way. Maybe that's the story of rebirth we should be thinking about as well. I told that children's story to remind ourselves that we are but a speck on the universe's horizon, and we are but stardust. The possibility that life exists here and perhaps elsewhere is, I think, another resurrection of a sort. I'm convinced that we're not the only intelligent species in the universe. Now, I don't know why they haven't made contact with us, can't tell you. Maybe they're waiting until we're a little more baked, I don't know. Maybe they're waiting till we get over this adolescent stage of ours with the war and all that. Maybe they can't get to us. But I do think that there's other life. The fact that there are billions and billions of stars with billions of planets orbiting the stars, there's got to be a few thousand stars that are in the Goldilocks zone just like us. And that's just carbon-based life forms. What if it didn't look like us at all? This is where I think science fiction can tell a different story about resurrection. Some of my friends this week were wondering how in the world I'm going to take the stuff of stars and touch it into this Easter story. Well, this is it, friends. This is how I think we're going to do it. Because good science fiction is the story of resurrection. This is where, as science writer Jamie Green says, science fiction can be more than entertainment. It's a generative act, she says, that creates new possibilities of life beyond Earth, which might be valid and potent as anything we can conjure up in a lab. She said that through fiction, we move beyond the likelihoods and the binary outcomes to look instead to what our imaginations could find with the limitless possibilities of worlds. What would it look like if we had contact within the next 100 years? How would that change our world? Consider that possibility this Easter as well. I believe in all kinds of resurrections, friends. They happen all the time. They don't have to be Jesus walking out of a tomb or flying out of a tomb or appearing to his disciples later. It could be that, but it could be other things. And where I find science fiction so important is because we want to know if we matter. We want to know what our existence means. Life on another world would give us context, a foil, a richer way of understanding ourselves, right? We search and listen and calculate the odds, but ultimately we can only speculate what will fit into the galactic picture. But through it all, friends, through it all, our visions, perhaps of alien worlds, are reflections of ourselves arising from our dreams and our hopes for a better world. In the meantime, all of us here can still experience a rebirth, the possibility of life anew. Life, observed an old friend of mine, is the tomb itself. There's finitude here. We're surrounded by it. The Buddha said life is attachment, and with that comes sorrow. Not always suffering, which is how it is often translated, but I think sorrow because of the expectations we have for life, which almost never come out the way we think they're going to come out. We're always maybe a little surprised, maybe a little disappointed, maybe a little bit of both. But what would it mean if we believed in the possibility of life again, even in our own life, even in these times? Think about the directions your life took when you had a failing of one sort or another. Not always, but the death of a loved one, a divorce, losing your job. The good news is, I think each of us has an Easter that waits for us. It's not reserved just for the holy or even the courageous. Each one of us has that power of life within us, because one of us today is feeling the pain of separation. Someone is struggling with the demons of addiction. Someone is feeling numb after seasons of meaningless labor. Some of us are absolutely horrified by what's happening in the world. It's hard. It's hard to walk out of the tomb sometimes, because sometimes it's easier to stay in the tomb, because at least it's familiar, right? There's so many stones, to use the metaphor, that were placed over the tomb that we have to roll away, the stones of life's choices, where sometimes we feel powerless to move. The stone of fear, a marriage that seems stuck while others have suggested we might get it going again, but we're not sure how because we're dealing with the stone of control, or we feel anger because of something someone said long ago, and we want to forgive, but we don't know how because we have the stone of anger before us, and we need to make a decision, but what if we make the wrong one? The stone of doubt. But even when these stones are rolled away, we might stay in the tomb for a while until the sunlight beckons us out, or until we have the courage to walk out. Behaviors, even unhealthy ones, are part of our comfort. And I have no illusions, my friends, that the times we're living in are challenging beyond all measure. I know that Easter has a lot more to do with bunny rabbits and daffodils. I know that there's a spirit within you that wants to walk away. I know that you want to be in the sunshine. You want to have your time to be reborn. It takes trust, because trust is the leap into the unknown. Trust doesn't always mean the best outcome, but trust often means a better outcome than you might have hoped. The true Easter story, the true Easter message, is that even facing death, we can find hope and possibility, perhaps not for our lives, but for those lives that we have touched and we have become immortal in the lives that follow us. When Jesus gathered his disciples on Maundy Thursday at the Last Supper, and he broke the bread and said, "Eat of this, my body," and held the wine and said, "Drink of this, my blood," it wasn't cannibalism. He was talking about the communion of all human souls that want to continue to live on even after death. And I have said for years in memorial services that the truest immortality we have is how we have touched other people. And that's also the Easter story. Trust calls us out of the empty tomb, across the stars, and out of our finitude into the possibility of life again. Easter Sunday dawned in Atlanta, gray and cold. Evan's parents were clearly exhausted. Family members and friends, both the parents and Evan's own clan, had been coming into that large conference room for almost 40 hours. It had been a dark vigil, but powerful healing had also occurred as his parents learned of this other community, his other life. Evan's life was being held together by medicine, but his life with all his friends had been the true miracle. Evan would die, of course, because there wasn't going to be that kind of Easter miracle. But all those who sat vigil with Evan came out renewed. As Paul said, all of us are worthy of divine love, neither Jew nor Gentile, neither free nor slave, neither man nor woman. Evan's parents, when they made the decision to pull the plug, knew that he was not going to be coming back in this life, but living on in those he had touched. Roberta held one last prayer circle of those who remained. It was there that she understood that his life had not been in vain, that his death was the Easter story. He had been estranged but found. Literally staunch and stuffy, hugging, rough and tattooed, crying together, life found a way. Life always finds a way. Even in that gray hospital in Atlanta on that gray day on planet Earth. Beloveds, Easter reminds us we can always walk out of the tomb. Easter reminds us that spring follows winter. Easter reminds us that light follows dark. And even when it seems cold and love seems distant and far away, we can remember that love and faith are still in our hearts. We learn again and we walk again out of the tomb of our struggles into a life of grace and hope and giving, a creative power that shatters the icy tomb of this winter and the barren planets above, which still give us light and whispers, hallelujah. Life rises again to become new. Hallelujah and amen.